I mix what I like, what I like.
I mix what I like is exactly where you want and need to be. I mix what I like, organic, vegan, soul food from your media diet. Live healthy. Live healthy.
I mix what I like, what I
We're
like.
here on I Mix What I Like. You may check us out on imixwhatilike.org, where you can see all these other shows and what my daddy likes and other cool things.
What's up, world? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like right here on Black Liberation Media. Again, I'm Jared Ball, very happy to be your host. Good morning, greetings, welcome to those filing in live this morning. Welcome, greetings. Please like, share, subscribe, tag Black Liberation Media as you put this in your socials. Do all of the things. Thank you very much in advance. To those who will see and hear this later, peace, welcome to you as well. Please do the same thing. Like, share, subscribe, support the Patreon, more content, more shows, a lot happening. So do whatever you can, materially or immaterially, and thank you very much again in advance. We are not live, at least I'm on my way to class, but we have a great show this morning, packed, so we're going to get right to it. So we're going to start with my discussion with the F.D Signifier about the new Peacock series that we both just finished watching called Fight Night, $1 Million Heist, starring Taraji P. Henson, Don Cheadle, Terrence Howard, Sam Jackson, and of course, Kevin Hart, whose Hart Productions produced it. So we're going to get into all of that. And then the second hour, we're going to get into a discussion that I had with Dr. Sut Jhally, Professor Emeritus at University of Massachusetts Amherst, to me, a legendary media studies scholar who has a new documentary on the multiple years heels of occupation of the American mind, a new documentary about Israeli propaganda called Atrocity Incorporated, How Israel Sells the Destruction of Gaza. We don't get into it during our discussion, but off the record, we talked a little bit about the contradiction that I, in this platform, will have to overcome in promoting a documentary that features Max Blumenthal in the gray zone. We've had our issues, but notwithstanding those issues, the importance of the message, the importance of the perspective and the history given about the selling of this atrocity is more important. Although at some point, I do think we have to have some discussions about the broader politics of those whose most overt work might be appreciable, but often leads or connects in different ways politically and certainly in movement spaces. But that contradiction acknowledged, at least off air, Professor Jhally and I have, I think, a very important conversation about Zionism, Israel, and propaganda that is I think still very much important. So, all right, so we're just gonna set it, let it run back to back, and then be out of here because there's a lot. We don't have a lot of time, unfortunately. So here it is again. Please like, share, subscribe, support the Patreon. And of course, as always, peace, only if you're willing to fight for it. Like Fred Hampton used to say, enjoy the show, everybody. Thanks again. All right, my man, FD. So you told me about this series. I watched it real quick. What did you think of the series? Let me, and especially given your connection to Atlanta,
right?
I'm interested in your thoughts.
I had so I told you about it. I hadn't finished it yet. I had two more episodes left.
Okay,
but I had seen enough.
Mm-hmm. So you haven't seen the end yet?
No, I've watched it now. Since then, I've watched it. I watched the end last night.
All right. So spoilers, everybody.
The spoilers, all the spoilers,
all the spoilers.
And I'll say it didn't end extra strong as like so the beginning's a little slow, the middle's middle's amazing, the end is good, but it gets real. I think I had a comment said it gets a little Hollywood toward the end, where it's like we want to do a bunch of extra stuff. It's like, all right, I get it. But it also ends on such a perfect tone for what is Atlanta right now. And I don't know if it knows the commentary it presented. where the end of the movie, we see the murderous gangster become a business elite. Mm-hmm. We see the hustler, con man become a notable preacher, and the only person that has some consistency of moral faculties throughout the movie is the cop, who becomes the internal affairs, which basically means he doesn't do anything.
That's definitely, I got that in my notes for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And so I'm like, wow. And then it says with love, or to Atlanta with love. And I'm like, was this shade or is that really love? Because like, is that supposed to be H.J. Russell? I got to go Google H.J. Russell and see if he has New York mob connections. I got to see Willie A. Watkins Funeral Home and see if they got some street connections. The Chicken Man guy is real. That was based on a real person.
Absolutely.
I found that out.
And the story is real. The thing happened. Like, did you know about? Because I had never heard of this. Did you?
I did not know about this at all. I know that area, the Collier Heights area of Cascade. I know of that fight. Right. And I know Atlanta. I know that Black Mecca speech that Sam Jack gave is, and that's one pass, because I know I'm full of passes and people don't like that about me. But one pass on the politics that I'll give the movie is that this is just real. This is really what I think the history of Atlanta political power for Black people is and has been. So I don't know if they know that they were making a relatively like negative commentary on what it means to be the Black elite, or this myth of the Black Mecca as oh man, I wish I'd have had this man's book at hand. It's a great book called The Myth of the Black Mecca, where he kind of outlines how Atlanta becomes Atlanta. It's a brother from Georgia State University, a professor. But yeah, so all that said, and I feel like you agree with me here, so it was an amazing piece of media. I can't remember the last time I watched Sam Jack in anything and was like, oh yeah, that nigga be acting.
Well, so I didn't have that reaction because I feel like he's been doing. So in this regard, I thought even Don Cheadle, to a certain extent, I thought everybody was doing everything they've always done acting wise. I just will say that I didn't mind it. So ever since I first saw him in School Days, Sam Jackson's been playing the same character. It's a variation of the same character. Same thing with Terrence Howard.
Oh yeah, Terrence Howard definitely was the first person was playing himself.
Same, and
Hart was a little better than usual.
Hart was. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I'm a little impressed with the way he does. He can. When he was giving his testimony under gunpoint at the end, I was moved. I'm not gonna front. I was moved. I was like, he's enough of an actor to get me to be like, damn, that was moving.
Yeah.
Oh, now I'm just blanking on everybody's name. The sister's name.
Taraji
P. Henson. Another variation of the same thing I think she's been doing in every when she was the side chick in Baby Boy. Empire. Yeah. In the one with man, I'm just doing terrible right now.
It's
the one
with a bunch of things. So you're
Petey,
right about
Petey Green, where she was a side chick to him, and So in that sense, I was like, okay, they're all doing the same thing, but I don't mind that. Like I like these stories. I'm a sucker for these stories. I'm a sucker for 70s soul. I'm a sucker for blaxploitation to a certain extent. I'm a sucker for all of that. I'm even a sucker for a little bit of that version of Black manhood. I can't front. That was the kind that I was raised by. I don't mind that. I don't
that like super machismo, old school, pimp and player stuff. I'm with it too.
Yeah. So in that sense, I didn't mind it. The few things it does politically, I think, are pretty slick. You touched on some of them, but yeah, go ahead. Yeah. I just wanted to. Yeah.
In terms of the performances, so I agree that they're all playing the hits. I do think Sam Jack, he's been Marvel, like he's been like so overtly Sam Jack for so long, and I can't remember the last time he's played a villain where I felt like this is villainous. This is a scare. I understand why people within the story are scared of this man.
Right.
So on and so forth. Now he does become more of a Sam Jack character again in those last 2 episodes, but those first 4 or 5, I'm like, okay, they really put Sam Jack in a wig and a makeup and said, "Nah, brother, we need to pull that out of you. We need you to get back to a certain energy that you've had." Also the newcomers, the faces I didn't recognize, the really evil hoodlum brother that was like real ruthless. I could watch him for another 6 to 10 episodes. Play that character. The one that was the last to go. That was the least scrupulous, the most cutthroat, but didn't want to kill the young brother at the end of the day.
Oh, right. That's right. Black. His character name was
William Black or Willie
Black or something like that. Yeah. He's good. I thought his sort of rival, the Soldier Boy superhero who gets killed, I was a little shocked to see him go. I was a little bit like, damn, man.
Unceremoniously, right?
Yeah. I was like, they're just going to kill him like that. I was like, oh, man. It felt, you know what it reminded me of when I got that same feeling when they killed old boy on The Wire back in the day.
I've never watched The Wire.
I'm not recommending it, but when they killed Michael, oh my God,
Michael, the brother that just died a couple of years ago.
Yeah. When they killed his character, it's similar. By a similar kind of character. It's another young kid coming out of nowhere, and it's like boom, and you're like, damn, what?
Yeah.
Wait, that's not supposed to happen. Wait. but
it's senselessness of it all.
Yes,
another thing
that gets
like
killed too. The one that
the young girl.
The one that they sent in as the insider.
I thought she's such a big star. I figured she'd be around for longer.
Is she a big star?
She's a pretty big up and coming star. She's one of Beyonce's proteges.
Okay.
Haley, right. I think it's either Haley Bailey or Chloe Bailey. I don't remember which one she is.
Oh,
she has a sister. The sister was Little Mermaid.
Okay.
And so they both got found off YouTube of all places by Beyonce when they were like 10 or 11 years old. And she's been like, I'm not trying to use this word to suggest things in the Diddy landscape.
Oh, right.
She was groomed by Beyonce to be like, you all are going to be next up. And so they have become both big stars as they become young adult women. I was surprised to see her go, but that's like, I guess that may be a thing for her because she's been killed early in a lot of stuff randomly. But yeah, the young brother, the young brother that was wicked. A lot of the sisters that were new. The wife I think was really good.
She was very good. I did like her. I don't know her from anything else, but I did like her. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
The rapper, Hotep
David Banner.
David Banner came through. It was like I didn't know. I wasn't sure that was him. I was like,
I recognized him immediately. I was like, oh, they got David Banner in here, but he was good, but not in a bad way. I thought he did a good job with that.
Yeah, but also to me, it's like the performances though clearly come from a talented writer or director because there's so many scenes where I'm like, I'm 80% in the scene or the scene is over and I realized, I was locked in. Like when Cheeto and Sam Jack meet in the interrogation room, like that's a moment.
Scene. That's a good scene.
When what's the weakest of them all, but he had the wig.
Terrence
Howard, who I just never have liked much. But the scene with the baseball batting cage, they stepped like that's a scene. To be like, okay, no, we need to establish like y'all ain't been paying attention. Like I should have known. Again, spoiler alert. It should have been. Did you know Terrence Howard was going to be the double crosser? Like it should have been obvious.
Yeah, I didn't. I can't claim I caught that. I do think that scene at the batting cages was a little bit cliche. A little bit. It wasn't poorly done, but it is a kind of cliche scene where the tough guy's in whatever his activity is, and it's menacing, and he then turns it into a violent, making the brother get hit by the.
But it was effective though. Like it was. I never seen. You're right. That cliche is not new. But to do it at the batting cage, I was like, oh, this is.
And if you've ever stood in front of a batting cage, that would be intimidating. If you got to stand there and just hope that he hits every pitch, or you're gonna take one in the chest or in the face. That's a problem.
I was a catcher as a kid, a little league baseball, and I did
that for 5 minutes. Yeah.
It took a couple of games before I was comfortable back there, even with full body armor on.
Because somebody's still swinging a bat right in front of your face.
Right. Yeah. So
that was the part when I was catching briefly. That was the part that was difficult for me.
Right.
It wasn't the speed. It wasn't the pitch. It wasn't catching the pitch as much. It was the bat swinging. It just felt so much closer to my head than it actually was. But that's, Anyway,
let's get to the politics though. So what did you think about Sam Jack's?
So I wrote a one-line sort of takeaway from this series. So just so I would be somewhat focused here. So my one-liner is, in a colonial setting where capitalism reigns supreme, all movements for various forms of freedom are reduced to hustles. Mm. That's my takeaway from that, because so much and I want to play a clip from this YouTube thing that I happened to find about this story that got to the similar point that I was getting to. But it just seems that because so much of it is peppered throughout the series, these mini speeches or statements that are suggesting, again, that Black liberation should be defined as Black business along these same sort of capitalist hustler lines. Just sort of, we're not getting rid of the hostile relationships. We're just replacing them with all Black figures involved. Right. And there are some explicit statements to that. I mean, there's the Sam Jackson has a scene. It opens with Kevin Hart's monologue where he says something about what makes Atlanta different is that we don't let our politics mess up our hustle, or something like that. So, and then there's it's
so true. Oh my God, it's so true. Go ahead.
No, so I mean that was so that was one thing. And then let's see, everything, just like this country, everything starts from corruption and theft and murder. So this idea that Atlanta becomes this Black Mecca on the back of this kind of violence and corruption and criminality, as if this would be somehow specific to Black Atlanta, is, well, no, this is what this country, this is what happens here. Everything starts. And in this, well, I can play the clip, but in this YouTube video, the host actually says what my point is. He says criminality replaced revolution as the cool thing. That's what this series and that time period is meant to reflect, or at least wanted. We as an audience are meant to see that as being what happens. That is because
this is 1970, right? This is
1970.
After King is dead.
King is assassinated. That's right. And they're even talking about that in the series. Remember, the reason they want Don Cheadle to be the bodyguard for Muhammad Ali, part of it is the white police chief and the white governor saying, on the one hand, we have a bad reputation now that King got killed, sort of on the backs of our community of the South being connected. Like, he wasn't killed in Atlanta, but this Atlanta preacher goes out and gets killed. And they felt somehow that there was an association with that. So they were like, after King gets killed, we can't have Muhammad Ali come down here and get killed. So they were like, but I'm not going to have my white cops protect him. So we got to have the Black cop do it. And then the governor's there to make sure that Ali leaves immediately. Like, thank you. You came down here. You made us a bunch of money. You did your thing. You got your victory. Now get out.
Right. See you for the Olympics in 30 years.
Which is where they go with the end of the documentary. So I did want to show this because this screenshot I took from the end of this is during the outro credits. They make reference to this. Ali would cement his love affair with the city of Atlanta, returning to light the Olympic torch in the 96 games. So
they don't talk about the massive upheaval of Black people outside to basically that supercharged jumpstarts gentrification and puts us on the path of Atlanta's a slow whitening. We fought it. It's only because of Atlanta's appeal to petite bourgeois and aspiring petite bourgeois black folks. And I'm in that conversation, by the way. I don't say that as like a pointing finger. I came here for Clark. I didn't know the game when I came, but I didn't leave when I figured it out, because I was like, oh no, this is a good place to be for me. If not for that, Atlanta would be, I don't know, like a lot of parts of New York right now, or any major city, any major formerly chocolate city that has been completely turned over into whiteness. The political
break something
power,
down for me real quick. I'm sorry, my bad. Sorry about that.
About the gentrification.
Well, yeah, because the series ends with them opening up, Sam Jackson opening up Bankhead Equity, right? Or Bankhead Unlimited. Right. What is Bankhead today in terms of tell us what
so it's so many things. So Bankhead is the last. So first off, Bankhead, whatever investment he thought that they're alluding to never happened. Bankhead was never Bankhead is what the rappers yelled out that they were from. It was a seafood spot. That's about it, right? Now there was a bank, a black bank. I don't know if it is still around. That definitely helped. There was two black banks, in fact, in Atlanta. Two black like banking institutions. I don't know if either survived COVID. I know one. I'm pretty sure one is gone. The other I have to look into. And they did fund black business ventures, right? So they did they did help fund the Atlanta Way, as it's mythologized. Willie A. Watkins Funeral Home is still around. I heard a commercial for him yesterday, ironically, on the radio. We do still have H.J. Russell, John Pascal, our two big black real estate moguls who build this, that, and the third. All so that is still there. But Bankhead is a really interesting thing to kind of highlight, because Bankhead is becomes one of, not immediately, at least in the 80s, I don't know the full timeline here, becomes one of the roughest areas in the city during the crack epidemic, and is the last part of the city that to be gentrified. It still kind of isn't. So that just speaks to how entrenched the poverty and dysfunction was there, that in 2020, in the 2020s, the white folks are still like, not yet. You know what I mean? Like when other parts of the city that used to be like that, I live in East Atlanta now. They used to call East Atlanta Little Vietnam. You know what I mean? It was that bad, and now there's $1 million homes here. So they haven't, broken ground like that for real on Bankhead. They don't call it that anymore now. Also, it's called Donald Lee Hollowell Parkway. They got to give it a new name. And so politically, Atlanta, since I've been here, it hasn't had a non-black mayor since, I think, Maynard Jackson in the 70s, right? So that movie does kind of predict the coming change of black political and business power in the city, which if you aren't critical, which most of us aren't, that's one I would have to touch on the conversation I had with Brother Diallo. Because I know some people are they got their own takes. It is what it is. But Brother Diallo made an important point. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Brother Diallo made an important point that most black folks aren't radical. They may perceive themselves as radical because of misinformation and counterintelligence towards what being radical really is. But they perceive black wealth as radical. So from a black wealth building standpoint, Atlanta did something very radical, but in the 70s by becoming the black Mecca. But the entire time, what you realize is that all we did was, like you said, replace the white people with us as the benefactors of the corporate elite that truly run the city. And you see that today with Cop City, as we have two mayors, Keisha Lance Bottoms and now Andre Dickens, who have pushed forward this agenda on Cop City and paid $60 million out of the $90 million budget from taxpayer funds, because the corporations that be Coca-Cola, Lockheed, Home Depot, Chick-fil-A, probably all these folks that's here, Nike, in the last years. These are Google we got here now, Rivian, cars, so many of these corporations that have come here because of Hollywood. They said we want the city to be safe post this whole uprising stings of 2020, and that's who we really answered to. The Olympics tore down projects all over the city, projects that the city couldn't bring themselves to reinvest in or redevelop or show support for however many for a couple of decades. They said, well, we'll just bulldoze them and we'll build parks. And here we are. And so for it to end on that note, I just thought I was into it the whole time. And I was, trying to figure out what its politics were. And so I know what its politics are, right? But I don't I feel like they were on the nose so much that they may have made more of a critique than they think they did. Because I don't think you can look at Chicken Man be a hustler this whole time and then become a pastor at the end and not you got to be radical to know the hustler to pastor pipeline is not one that we celebrate in community. You know what I mean? So it's interesting.
Yeah, that's it. That is interesting because I thought I could see it being both a joke. Because it is kind of like, wow, he went from hustling directly to the church, and that's like you said, on the nose. But I could also see them trying to paint this as a positive, or leave it to be interpreted as a positive, if not for just apolitical audiences, but for what are ultimately the white corporations that got to sign off on some of this stuff. I mean, it still is a Peacock, NBC product. So like it's a Universal, whatever. So it's at the end of the day, Hart Productions notwithstanding, this is their product. So that's, so I'm not entirely sure, but what is pretty clear is that, again, they are saying that, that the criminality that we see these Black men engaged in was indicative of was almost an encouraged offshoot of that 1970s moment of moving towards post-civil rights, not quite obliterating Black power yet. This is Nixon coming into office and saying, we want Black capitalism. We want to support Black business. The Senator Johnson, that's the Black Senator Johnson that's described in here in real life, was very much, apparently, at least, I don't know. I mean, I've watched this a couple YouTube.
Who was he based? Was that Julian Bond?
No. It was I thought Johnson was his actual name. No, Johnson's his actual name.
Okay.
Oh man,
I thought he was fictionalized. I have to go.
No. Like a state senator from Hank Johnson, Congressman. No. That's not the same one. That's not the right one. I'll have to. So like, hold on one second. Let me. He's shown this guy here. This is, let's see, because in this documentary, this YouTube. He does it like a documentary. No. Right. Like in this one, this guy's in this Al Prophet guy, American Dope he's all into gangster stuff. Like this guy here,
movie of the robbery
and they were going to make a movie about this back after it happened. Originally. I'm going to put this video in the show description. People, this is a very
I'm going to check this out.
Because they get into, because he makes. In fact, let me play the clip that I'll play it for you here that I had pulled up from this, where he's making the point that I mean, he comes to the same conclusions I do regarding this Nixonian thing. And I was shocked a little bit to see it show up. This out a little
Criminality bit. Replaced revolution as the cool thing, at least superficially, in many elements of the black community. Now,
He's trying to be careful.
Yeah,
was it an accident?
exactly.
Was it planned propaganda? Well, that's a serious and interesting question. You know, we'll never really know that for sure, but it's something for you to think about.
Yeah,
a man like
definitely.
Eddie Jackson talking about no longer, I ain't trying to catch the streets, I'm trying to catch Rockefeller. That I'm so far away from
And this guy's like a son of one of the
I'm
OGs
riding
or
Cadillacs.
something like
I got
that.
diamond rings. I'm a black man flaunting my wealth in a very unapologetic way.
The face of the ghetto is the face of despair. It is
Then
a
they go
face
right to
whose
Nixon.
eyes
This is
see
wild.
only
68, 69, Nixon takes over in 68. You know, we talked about, without getting deep into political science, maybe the Nixon administration took seeing black men empowered who are not fight the power, down with the man, wearing berets, that we need to phase out that Huey Newton look.
more black ownership of business and land and homes can be the multiplier of pride that will end our racial strife. The black man's pride is the white man's hope.
On the
Wow.
side, Richard.
Wow. Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh, and what's so funny, it was so true and so effective. The conversation I've had with some of my elders as I've had political growth in the last couple of years, conversations with my dad, about like, y'all were in Chicago, y'all were there in the shit. Like, what happened? Why didn't y'all roll with the continue to roll with the radicals? My dad was like, yo, niggas was broke. and they were broke, and we didn't want to be broke anymore. And so, like, you know, my uncles, oh man, I don't put too much family shade out there. One of my uncles came to visit with me a little while ago, and when he told me his story, I was like, ooh, I'd have got in you. This is the minor. If you told me he was doing this now, I'd have gotten you so bad about this trajectory you decided to take in the middle of the revolution. You was like, look, I'm gonna go get into real estate in Florida. But that's what a lot of you brothers did. And it's no surprise to again be self-critical. It's no surprise that the black children of that Warren Court era, that post-civil rights era, the young Xers and the millennials would be so inclined to this black excellence mythology and have it be such a core driving factor of how we understand and engage with blackness, that we be so enamored with it and so unable to turn away from it, even as it presents itself to be a falsehood under Obama, you know, in the post BLM time frame. I don't know what's going on. Sorry. Yeah. People with like American flags walking down the street. As I'm saying this, I'm trying to figure out what the hell going on. I was live a little while ago and the police pulled up. Niggas paranoid. They putting it in my mailbox. He is putting an American flag in my mailbox. All right.
No, I'm not mad. I'm not mad at that. I think when I see white folks in groups with American flags, I start getting nervous. So
yeah.
I'm not mad at it.
It was a black woman and a white woman though. And
that's equally nerve-wracking.
There is Atlanta's.
Maybe that's worse.
Right. There ends Atlanta's unique political reality. You know, we have such an ardent fan base of the current American political project, right? Not just like, you know, survivorship, not just, you know, subversively participating in protests, but like, no, we can do this. We're going to get this money. This the Black Mecca, this Wakanda.
Absolutely.
And you know, that speech, and so it's not just the speech with Sam Jack. What I thought was interesting. So Sam Jack gives the speech. She's a couple of little one-liners that I thought were really interesting. It might have been after the second one that I text you. I was like, you got to watch this. Because the first one, he gives the speech to Chicken Man about the Black Mecca. But then when he sits down with the senator and he says, so what you're saying is you'll do business with these white criminals over here, but not this black criminal in front of you. And I'm like, but you know, we all still talk about crime though, right? If we're not talking about like, you know, revolutionary crime.
That's the point.
It's like, no, just capitalist crime. And then the last one, and I think the last episode is And this is where I was like, I would have been a little bit. I really think they did Taraji. I don't want to say wrong. It's hard to explain. I feel like they didn't really have a lot to do with Taraji's character after the whole heist was over, but they just kind of kept her around because it's like it's Taraji P. Henson. You're not gonna do her like you did Chloe Bailey.
No.
But so they have this kind of again very on the nose conversation in the car where the cop and the gangster are arguing, and she's like, "If Atlanta's ever gonna be anything, y'all got to be able to work together." And I'm like, I mean, you right, because that's what happened. But
no, I think the connection you make between your mailbox and this series is it works, because that's sort of the point that I take away from it, that clip we were just looking at is making as well, that the laying of that groundwork
movie. Do you see
you could certainly I didn't see it as that overtly. I mean, it could certainly be repurposed for that.
Yeah, that's what I should say. Yeah, I'm sorry.
He does say no. It's good, because I'm going in that direction anyway. I mean, Sam Jackson does say at one point during, I think it's the speech to Kevin Hart about the red clay, that he himself was born in Georgia, and then he dug in the dirt one day a hole and he saw red clay, and he said his father or his uncle told him that's something about China, and he said no, it was just joking, it's not China, that's the blood of our ancestors. So if it is going to be turned into an ADOS thing, it could be, because it becomes that our ancestors died and bled in this land, therefore we have the right to make this money and do this thing. My first thought is always, but you had ancestors elsewhere also whose blood is in that soil also. But we don't have to get caught up in that as well. Like your ancestors didn't start here, but that's okay. That's okay. But it does make that point. And then when he gives the speech to the senator, he is making that pitch. He's saying, I'm not the fist up beret wearing threat. I'm trying to make the money you're trying to make. I'm trying to get that real estate deal. That was his whole point.
Right.
That's going to be a hot spot.
For this airport, which I should add, was genuinely transformative to Black economic power in the city, was the Maynard Jackson. Is it the Maynard Jackson Airport? Hartsfield Jackson. Named for Maynard Jackson.
Importation of heroin after Vietnam. It was the.
But no, not just that.
That's what they were talking. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So it is, of course, there's drug trafficking, sex trafficking. It's the busiest airport in the world. But going back to that Warren Court activity, right? Maynard Jackson or whomever, I'm not sure who it was. It might have been somebody later. Had it somehow put into law that the airport would be contractually obligated essentially to run through Black business lanes. So like for every however many contracts or dollars that the airport was going to generate and spend, it had to flow through Black hands. And that helped create a lot of wealth in Atlanta. And Atlanta's always in wealth. I want to make sure people also understand this. Atlanta's had wealth since Reconstruction for a multitude of reasons. Atlanta, not Confederate, what's the other army? The Union Army stayed here.
Union Army. Oh, yeah.
For longer than for a long time, because Atlanta was such an important rail space. And that kind of helped keep the Klan at bay in those earlier days. Now, white folks still came and terrorized and burned shit down, but it allowed kind of a more of a head start that was sustained as Black people got more political power. We still suffered through redlining. We still had all the things happen, but it never could eradicate that economic and political power in Atlanta like it did in other places, because we had more of a foothold on it. Because they couldn't, because the people couldn't come here and just do any old thing, which again, like me and my wife traveled early this year. So I don't travel much. And we went to Nashville, which is, I jokingly call it white Atlanta, because it's the same energy, just white people. And we were in line to get pancakes or something with our kids. We was the only Black folks there. And I got a feeling that I hadn't gotten in years, when I was like, oh, ain't no niggas here. And it feels like it, And you don't feel that in Atlanta. Especially if you are of a certain economic or educational political class, you can walk around, run around Atlanta feeling any type of way that I don't feel a lot when I leave the city. And when I leave the city, I remember the uniqueness of that feeling. So it is an intoxicating, addictive drug to think we can reproduce this. And then no one's being harmed in the process of this. Meanwhile, Atlanta has a higher economic disparity than Detroit. I think it's the highest in the country right now.
Wow.
In terms of the haves and have-nots, and we got all this black wealth, and we still can't keep the streets safe. So what was that? So like that airport and so many of those types of deals give Atlanta the veneer of Wakanda. The performance, the branding. And it's not until you go to what's left of Bankhead, or now you go to Riverdale, you go to certain parts of Southwest DeKalb, where there's still bastions of black, dysfunction centralized, because most of it's just been spread out and scattered across the suburbs. So there's very little like centralized, large scale poverty in Atlanta anymore. It's still there, but it's not like it was, not long after this film would have taken place. So you don't see it. So you think that it's real. You know what I mean? You think that this is real, and it looks the part. Niggas walking around in Tesla and running around in Teslas and this other dumb new looking car Elon Musk tricked us into getting. The hookah lounges, all that stuff. It's piping hot here. And it's not until you try to figure out what's going on with this Cop City thing that you realize how cooked we actually are. In this city.
That's exactly. And what this series does is, so I found the rest of my notes here. That opening exposition, by the way, from Kevin Hart, where we know our history, but we don't let history fuck up our hustle. Mm-hmm. It's an apologetic for the black bourgeoisie, which I think this whole series ultimately is. It's because even with it starting with in a focus being on gangsters, the backdrop is they're trying to become businessmen. They're trying to become good American citizens in the context of what that means, primarily around black capitalism. So that's where
they very explicitly say on multiple occasions that this nation was built on exploitation and slavery and murderers. And so now that we're exploiters and murderers,
absolutely,
enslavers, it's time to get ours.
In fact, I'm at the point when I heard Sam Jackson say, to Kevin Hart, you said you want this to be the Black Vegas. So first of all, Kevin Hart's dream is to have Atlanta be the Black Las Vegas. So I'm already thinking, okay, so what's Las Vegas? A gangster-inspired, corporate run theft of white people's money. So you want a black version of that, like to rip off every day, because then they say we want black wealth with black money, and then with black dollars, and then Sam Jackson elevates and says, I don't want Black Vegas, I want Black Mecca, like Mali, which was an interesting.
The richest black man ever,
Mansa Musa. I want to be Mansa Musa, and we were king. And I'm sitting there saying, no, I don't want kings at all. Like I don't want no kings. Like I don't want. Like this is my whole point. But that, and then
Wakanda
at the end,
is a monarchy.
That's what I'm saying. That's why it's got to fall. That's my whole point. But the thing is, at the end, they say. What you talked about already, it ends its full propaganda with Don Cheadle becoming internal affairs, which was his heroic step up, hand me down from the white racist chief that now is going to let him, and then we get to see him as his first act as internal affairs get to arrest the racist white detective
that they just palled around with this entire time. I was like,
well, he punched him in the face and all that.
But like it was something visually to see. Like again, it's almost like it was there at moments where it was going to do something more provocative, and then it would stop itself just short. because there's something power or meaningful about watching that overtly racist cop who's tried to shoot Chicken Man in the back at one point just run free, and everybody's like, no, he's okay, he's a good cop. I think was an actual line from the movie.
He's a good cop.
And that's exactly how that works. And so he does get to arrest him at the end, but if you're internal affairs, you're still very much within within the system and limited.
It's again an apologetic for the police because they want us to say, like, of course there's going to be a few bad apples, but we as an institution are great and we'll fix it. That's why we have an internal affairs. So it should read, well, if you need an internal affairs, if you need a permanently institutional body to police the police, then you know your shit is shady. But instead of that, it's presented as no. This is the correctiveness of a flawed but heading towards perfect institution. And it's like, we don't, why, so that's why and now that you've said it, I'm probably going to be stuck on this. I'm never going to be sure, but that's why when I saw initially Chicken Man go to the pastor, become a pastor, I was like, are they doing the cliche because they meant for us to see as this is a heroic thing? But to your point, it might also be
subtle shade.
Yeah,
because you can't launder that amongst us too tough. Like for a white audience, that may have seemed like a great thing. Right. But if it's one thing I think we got as a community,
that's a good point.
We know the pastors be some hustlers and phonies and pimps a lot of times.
Because he even says when he's at the pulpit, he says, I used to collect numbers. People like numbers. Now I collect people for Jesus. I was like, if you're in the pews hearing that.
Oh, I love going back to Cheeto's character.
Yeah.
I think that's the most realistic, like true to form of that character of the black cop. I love that he calls, not love, right? But like, I think it's so telling and accurate of that, of the type of guy that does that when he calls Hart's character a hoodlum in one of their first meetings.
And he calls Ali Clay.
He calls Ali Clay just instinctively. And I love that everybody consistently, like nobody gives him they respect him like out of like, being a cop. And, when they got to do the buddy cop cliche halfway through the movie,
right?
Like, a lot of the real animosity that would have been there gets thrown out. But they keep calling out this nigga over and over and over again. And they're right every time. And the movie, I don't think the movie ever really gave him a lot. They still propagandized the whole thing by giving them the ending. But the movie made it very clear from the black perspective that did not fuck with dude. A lot of times. I may have missed something, but they at least that much honesty.
The community is clear on him, but I think the series does still present him very well. I think they do a good job of presenting him as a still heroic figure. They want us to see this cop as the good guy. So like even when he does the Chicken Man hoodlum and Ali Clay thing, and even when he's he still is shown defending, like he punches the detective for calling him nigger, referring for other black people as niggers. And he's still part of even his challenge to Ali. And I got caught in this. That's why I was like, this is effective. It's working. Because there was that scene where he's talking to Ali and Ali's telling him what he's had to suffer. Ali is saying, look what I've had to suffer. And Cheeto's character is like, man, I've been a cop since 1948 in fucking Atlanta. Like, what the fuck do you think I don't know if this is exactly what he's saying, but the vibe is, what the fuck do you think I've been putting up with? Right. And I was like, damn, I was like, you know what? I even felt for a second, I was like, you know what? That's messed up. It was probably some shit he had to deal with. But at the same time, he's a cop. But he's a cop.
That's his choice. But there's a type of black person, especially even here in Atlanta now, with our petite bourgeois black population, that genuinely feels, I put this in my last video, that there's a us and them amongst us, and that we the ones doing right. Yeah, we still suffer under these white folks, but we're doing the right thing and y'all are doing the wrong thing and making it harder for us with the wrong thing y'all are doing. I guess what I think I like is that I don't think at any point, aside from it being like the necessity of like having to work together, they did the full on, I understand you, brother, too tough with him. You know, they were pretty consistently like, nigga, you a pig.
Yeah,
like
they
over
did.
and over
They called
again.
it a lot too. That's true.
You know, and it was like I just appreciated that was as far again. They got to the edge, and like this is a Kevin Hart production.
Yeah.
It's interesting because Hart's I mean, this probably was true to him, because if there's one person that's like, I'm gonna hustle and make all the money and not really worry too much about what it means about my career or the quality of my work, it's Kevin Hart. I've never been much of a Kevin Hart fan. I can't think of anything I've ever watched of his that I felt thoroughly satisfied with. He's always got a joke or two and a moment or two in some of these movies, but like never have I been like, let me check for this new Kevin Hart thing, or like, oh, I really enjoy it. Like when I posted this on my community page, people was like, FD Kevin Hart. I'm like, yeah, I'm just as shocked as you are. So I wonder.
Yeah, this is the best thing I think I've seen him do. Yeah, that's a good point. This is.
Yeah. Did you watch that Netflix thing he did with Wesley Snipes? Was that Wesley Snipes? Was that any good?
I didn't. No, I can't say it was good. It started off with potential, but then it got too much into Kevin Hart as like Jason Bourne, and I was like, I'm not buying this. It was like I was like, I don't believe this is not believable to me. A lot. It just kind of got too weird. Why it was a little bit too wild. But I'm not. So look, I'm not a fan of a lot or all of it really, but I'm not mad at seeing someone within these confines it looks like trying to do something a little bit different. I'm not mad at the sort of, I'm a sucker for what Eddie Murphy used to do a lot with the buddy collectives. It's like like get all my friends to make a movie. And so I'm a sucker for that. Yeah. And I like if Adam Sandler can keep doing this with all his whack ass friends and movies, why can't like I was, and I don't mind. Like I said, I'm a sucker for some of this stuff. So like I like seeing talented, and it is nice to see a bunch of talented Black people doing something that isn't, I don't know, it's a Black Panther level of well, it's not that exactly. And and
this doesn't feel like it was made for white people.
No, it wasn't. That's probably why I think you said it's not a hit. Like it seems to. I think I didn't look this up, but I thought you said it wasn't really doing.
I don't have any data on that, but just paying attention to the social media streets, nobody's talking about it.
Yeah, I hadn't heard. I didn't even know it existed until you told me about it. I think it had a good Rotten Tomatoes score, so people who watch it seem to think it's good, and I can understand that.
Yeah,
but I could also see why, if you're not, especially if you've grown up, to your point, over the last 20 years or 10 years, really, and you haven't seen Sam Jackson in a Black film targeting Black audiences, which is what we were used to seeing him, at least initially, then you might be like, I'm not trying to watch this shit. And where's the...
And then Terrence Howard, goofy ass in his wig, again.
And I watched an interview where they're all talking. They were all interviewed together, and they make a lot of fun with him about that. Because I was actually kind of curious. I was a little bit curious to see what the dynamic was with them off screen, given what it seems to be Terrence Howard's devolving intellectual
weird guy
slide. Yeah, like. So I was wondering, like, what does that look like? Do they joke him about his science shit and hanging out with Rogan, or are they applauding that? I don't know. It was, but yeah, he does.
Most of these niggas is weird behind the scenes, so it probably is.
I'm sure
it is what it is.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
And Hart's so check focused, and Sam Jack seems like he's check focused too. And sadly, Taraji has to remain to be check focused according to her, because she's still not getting paid much in the game. But all these newcomers, like I need to see that Willie Black guy do something else. I was looking up his IMDb, whatever it is.
IMDb. Him and the one that his spoil. The spoil. I would like to see him. And then honestly, because let me just be perfectly honest, the way they're depicted in this series, I admit that a lot of my attraction is just on the attraction, but there's a couple sisters in there I would like to see get chances to actually act beyond the, you know, the sister that played Lola Falana.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's do you know?
I don't know who that is, but I was like,
well,
so
her, you might have a
famous?
chance. That's
okay.
She's that's I'm gonna fuck up her name. That's Lori Harvey. No, that's a name you had to have heard. No, Lori Harvey is interesting. This is like one of the few movies she's been in because she's an influencer. Really, she just dates eligible bachelors. She dated Puffy and his son.
Oh,
Future.
Oh my God!
Future.
Never
I think I thought the one dude. She had Michael B. Jordan for a second. And people were excited.
Oh my God!
About that.
I'm over here thinking she's an innocent young actress. She just needs a chance.
She's kind of a celebutante. You know, she's not as like, you know, rancid and scandalous as like Paris Hilton was or Kim Kardashian because she's black and she can't do that.
Oh,
but
wow!
But she is mostly just known for being really attractive and dating a lot of famous black men, you know.
Okay, I get it. I get it. I just thought maybe, but she seemed like she might have some. I don't know. And what about Taraji's sidekick, the light skin?
She's brand new. I had never seen her before. I liked her too. I had never seen her before.
I would like to see them play some
blaxploitation.
Blaxploitation.
Give me something. Hollywood don't got nothing for black women to do unless a black woman writing it. Unless we can get Issa. Or God forbid, what's the sister name? Tragic Mulatto nonsense.
Yeah, what's her name? I can't. Oh man, this has been a bad afternoon for me. But yeah,
it's fine.
One of them
I'm talking about. Unless one of them do it, you know. I see what Issa can do with her. You know, the other woman. I mean, I see whatever she do. You know,
if I understand correctly, oh my God! Today is a mess.
We got to get
who's the one Issa's been beefing with?
Amanda Seals.
Amanda Seals. So now that she got rid of Amanda Seals, she got room for another light skinned woman.
Light skinned sister in her roster. Because Issa do be front and center for the dark skinned sister. She don't put no light skinned women center pressing.
And I'm not mad. Congratulations. Yeah. But you got one on the roster. So let's see if
you got an open slot. Let's see if we can slide
old Afro sister could get it.
Even the kids, the young boy, the young boy. I thought that was that was another really good thing.
The one who took his own life.
No, well, him too.
Because I thought he was
also
good too.
The dynamic between Willie Black and the young brother that he was supposed to kill. That grooming, like when we talk about, we don't get into that because we want to protect black men's images, and I get that, but we also got to be analytical of how the streets work when we talk about the brothers that's really in the streets grooming would-be straight and narrow young men into being just like them. And that was as a man that spent time in these schools, that's visited young men in jail, and that worked in the juvenile court system, you do see when the community and the system fails these young brothers. It's guys just like a Willie Black. It's like he said, "You haven't popped your cherry yet," and it was killing a motherfucker. And I was like, "Ooh, I don't know if they're trying to do this, but this is an important detail of commentary.
That would have been on purpose, yeah.
Because
when I looked up the dude that did the film, I forgot his name already too, but he's known for a lot of like popular like silly movies with Kevin Hart. So there was nothing that popped up on his IMDb that immediately gave he's on some deeper, thoughtful thing. But that doesn't mean it's not. It's just that maybe this was the only way he could find build up to that.
Yeah, you think about Boots.
Boots
one of
Riley.
I was arguing because people. I guess we'll give a second to the Diallo gate that I know a handful of people have about what you say.
No, so I didn't see the interview. I didn't see the discussion, but a couple people hit me up and said that the two of you were concluding that they were saying you both were vote blue no matter who at the end.
That's so dishonest. Diallo explicitly said he's not voting for Kamala, and that it was a short-sighted
interesting
response, yada yada yada. But what he did talk about, what we did kind of discuss was that the fact that this is often people's like highest form of engagement with a radical political discussion is in and of itself a problem. The way people that this is their line is kind of arbitrary and silly. And I bring that up because I'm thinking about we're broadcasting right now through Google. You know what I mean? Like, people are going to watch this through Google's spy apparatus on all of us. Like, we're all maneuvering through material conditions that in no way benefit our liberation goals. And I was bringing that up because I got into a discussion with somebody about this very thing. And I'm like, y'all are drawing hard lines at voting, or insert anywhere you're drawing hard lines. If it's really just drawing hard lines to reduce coalition building, and I get it. I get the way compromise happens. But unless you have like unless you have a good track record and a real plan behind that, if it's just for likes and clicks, I'm not really that interested, because like the most provocative, revolutionary media we've gotten is from Bruce Riley through Amazon in the last couple of years. And so it's like we're all kind of working with the tools we got in our hands at the moment. And so I say that to say maybe this brother, he had an African name. So, is that a chosen name, or is he actually Nigerian or something? I don't know.
No, I gotta look that up again too. Yeah.
But maybe him and Kevin were doing all this silly kind of disposable stuff so that they can maybe start dabbling into some more provocative things. Because I'll give I'm sure Kevin planned for this to be on HBO or Netflix or something.
Netflix, yeah.
Because Peacock is at the bottom of the totem pole, and I can also imagine that those other people were a little put off. This was a little aggressive. It wasn't revolution. It wasn't boots, right? But it definitely did more than these things tend to do, than I expected from it when I turned it on. Kind of lazily, like, let me find something to watch.
Shea Ogbonna, that's his name. And so like when he's, the Penguin, Low Life, God's Country, there was some, I haven't seen these. Wait, there was somebody else involved with this. I must've been looking at somebody else.
That's not him. That's not Kevin Hart joints.
No, these
heard the Penguin's real good.
Okay. So maybe, yeah, I got that part wrong.
Check him out.
Yeah.
So let's see what happens. We'll see if Disney comes grab them.
Well, that would make So first of all, I don't want to overdo it giving these folks credit, but I would at least say that, because at the end of the day, whatever positives we found in this series, it does fit enough to a formula that would be relatively unthreatening. However, maybe it was just threatening enough to get it back set down to Peacock, because it is kind of crazy if that Netflix would have had a chance to have all of these stars on it and would have passed. I'd have to look into that too. That's and real quick, because my bad. Go ahead.
No, I was just co-signing what you said. I can't imagine that you got this many black stars, A-listers on a show, and it ends up on Peacock, except for seeing what it was, which not revolutionary, but like tiptoeing around it. Right. And gesturing a little bit, like, hey,
or just not enough for white. I mean, again, if the goal, they need white audiences. So if their handlers or whatever, their A&R, whatever that version is for A&R, is looking at these products and they're like, I don't think we really want to sit and watch 8 hours or whatever the series run is of them not doing Marvel stuff, or like Will Ferrell buddy cop stuff, or Blackish type stuff. This is a little bit, maybe send that shit to Peacock. Just real quick, because I unfortunately I do have to go, but I want to clarify that it is Leroy Johnson is that politician that they're talking about. Mm-hmm. He was in the Georgia State Senate from 63 to 75. And this is the one that they depict in the series, and that is talked about in that video that we mentioned that I'll link in the show description, that talks a little bit more about, because Johnson was in the mix. So he wanted to make a documentary about this. He wanted to, So
he ran against Maynard in the 70s. And Maynard is like the patriarch of the new Atlanta way that we're still kind of living under today. Both good and, both the the nice to experience Black economic power and dwindling political power, but also what's still happening on Bankhead and other parts of, well, what's left of the city after those folks got shuffled out to Clayco and DeKalb and other places. So it's interesting. Well, either way, it was a pleasure. I was so, because I was like, my first thought was I got to make a video about this. I'm like, ain't nobody see this shit, which means this video gonna bomb. So I gotta have an intellectual conversation with somebody.
So you said go to where all the videos already bomb, and I'll have the conversation there. It's all good. FD, it's always a pleasure, man. Appreciate you.
Indeed. Appreciate you.
I enjoy it. Look, for what it was worth, I enjoyed the suggestions. So anytime you
trust me, as soon as Sam Jack made that speech, I was like, oh, Ball gotta see this. Ball gotta see this. Oh shit. Peace and blessings,
all right, man. Thanks a lot, man. Professor Sut Jhally, welcome to the show. Welcome back. It's good to see you again. I hope all is relatively well, and thank you for taking the time to join us.
Sure. Yeah, things are only as relatively well as they can be in this crazy time.
Perfectly said, and unfortunately accurate. So on the show we do on Saturdays with Renee, my colleague Renee and I talked a little bit about your now more classic documentary, Occupation of the American Mind, and all that it does so well in really catching people up, not only to the broader history of Israel, but specifically how it produces messaging that defends that settler colonial project. At the end of the documentary, you all do point to some optimistic efforts on the horizons that at the time of the film coming out could have been seen to have been making some positive progress on how things were advancing, including the work that you had been doing for so many years in helping people become more informed of how media and propaganda work around shaping public opinion around Israel. And yet here we are, a year in to this most recent form of, the genocide at this scale, I guess. And you've made a new documentary. Could you talk a little bit maybe about what happened to the optimism that we saw at the end of that documentary, and then have that lead to where you've taken us in your more recent one, the link to which we'll have in the show description, of course. But that is sort of where I thought we could maybe begin this conversation.
Sure. Well, actually, I think what we said at the end of Occupation, which was the consensus was breaking down, especially among young people, and especially among progressive Jews. I actually think we've seen that's actually what has proved to be true as a result of the reaction to October the 7th. The campus protests, I would never have thought they would have happened, so quickly. And the organization of progressive Jews to counter, what Israel is doing, all of that I think is new and has really caught. And so we really have to think about public opinion in two ways. One is the elite, and the elite has not changed. The elite has become even more established, has become even more kind of concrete in its support of Israel. And I think that's an interesting question, which is why is that? Why is it that not only American elites, but Western elites, European elites, whether it's British or French or German, etc., have this undying loyalty to this cult that has, taken over this one country that is now bringing us to the verge of World War III, or the verge of catastrophe. Like, what is it? So I think that's an untold story, which is how the cult of Zionism, and I think the only way to describe it is a cult, because it has nothing to do with objective analysis. There's nothing to do with the truth. There's nothing to do with history. It's all to do with mythology and religion, etc. How is it that this messianic cult that says God chose this people for this land, and they're the chosen people, has taken over the West, has conquered the West? So that's one story. And I think that, and in Occupation of the American Mind, We went into that a little bit, which is how the American government looks at Israel as its proxy in the Middle East, and I think more broadly, European governments do that as well. But at the same time, I think the popular public opinion has really shifted, and Israel has never been seen in a more negative light, not only around the world but in the United States, and especially among young people. And again, that's something at the end of the movie. That's what we pointed to. Was Frank Luntz, who is the main who tracks this stuff. Like you said, college students are a disaster, and young people are a disaster, and I think that's absolutely true. And young Jews, for them, for this cult is a disaster as well. So I think that's what we've seen in the last year. Is on the one hand the doubling down by American elites on their support of this genocidal cult. And on the other hand, this really uprising among young people, and especially among the children of elites. I mean, it's significant that a lot of this started with Ivy League colleges, at Columbia, at Harvard, etc. And that is a real crisis for the society and for the projects as they see it. In fact, just recently. You mentioned this film. We quoted someone called Alex Karp, who is a major CEO of a defense contractor, and he said, he said, look, we think about these college protests as a sideshow. And he said, it's not a sideshow; it is the show, because if we don't win the intellectual battle. And he was talking more broadly, if we don't win the intellectual battle, these are his words, he says, we will not be able to deploy armies across the world. That's how important this is. And that is why I think you've seen this incredible repression of what the students have been doing, whether it is in Harvard, whether it is in Columbia. I mean, I teach, and I'm retired, but I still teach at the University of Massachusetts. And during the last May, when the encampments were happening, UMass had its own encampment, and it was violently broken up by the police. This is UMass Amherst, right? It's not a big fancy Ivy League college. Okay, this is a public university, and there were these uprisings and demonstrations, in a range of different places. They had this encampment, and it was right near the end of the semester, and they could have let it go. They could have said, it literally was the end of the semester. The students were going to go home in like 10 days time. It would have gone. They didn't have to do anything. It was peaceful. They were not disrupting anything. It was in a space and yet they chose to break it up in the most forceful way, calling in the state riot police. And they made over 130 arrests. And they then prosecuted these people in the most extreme way. And I think what's going on is this is the elite, and not just the Ivy League colleges, but college presidents as a whole being told, look, the colleges are a real problem. You've got to come down on them. And even though, for example, UMass has a new chancellor, who could have just, as I said, it's a very, very weird thing to do. He could have just let it go, and it all would have stopped for the summer, and yet he felt he had to do it because he had to make a statement that this was not going to be allowed. And so I think that is how serious for them this issue is. As Alex Karp said, if you don't win the intellectual battle now, you will not be able to, the military-industrial complex is going to be in trouble. Because it relies upon ignorance. It relies upon the fact that people don't know that 50 cents of every tax dollar goes to the military. If they knew that, if they knew that they could have free college education, based on just one day of the military-industrial complex, the things would start to unravel. So they've got to make sure that discussion doesn't happen. So
say that part again. 50% of taxes.
Sorry.
Could you say that part again? It's a good way to phrase it. Yeah.
of the money that is spent, the money when you come to April 15th and you do the tax year, of the revenue that is collected through income tax, 50% of that, of discretionary income, goes to the military. I mean, they try and fool you by including within it Social Security and Medicare, etc., all of which are separate. They have nothing to do with. And when you break it out, it's literally 50 cents of every tax dollar that people pay.
Yeah. Welfare's, has it ever been more than 1% of the budget? I mean, it's a very small, if I'm not mistaken, maybe my memory's off, but welfare is very small.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, it depends what you include within it. There's a number of programs, but it's in the region of 1 to 2%.
Yeah.
Yet all the focus is on that, which is let's pick on the poorest people there are, and we'll all focus on that, and we will not talk about this major thing. And when I point it out to my students, I say, look, these are choices that can be made. Okay, you can either have a military industrial, you could either have this military, economy that is going to at some point blow the world apart, or you could take a little bit of that and you could have free college education. You could have free healthcare. You could, and when the choices are put like that, people's eyes start to open up.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And then I know others have pointed out that just even in terms of what is spent when in compared to other so-called developed nations, the average citizen in this country, in the United States, gets so much less. So it's this idea, and then they have to pay. They end up having to pay out of pocket for so much more than what they would get if they just had more socialized whatever. But yeah,
when I tell my students, go to Europe, and the cost of a college education is minuscule compared to what it is here. Universal healthcare is universal in the Western democracies. Why is that? The America is the richest society that has ever existed, and yet we can't afford to have basic things paid for. And those are all choices. And to maintain the present structure requires that you keep the population in ignorance, to make sure that people don't know what's going on.
There was the other that I thought was fascinating was that leaked audio from Jonathan Greenblatt of the ADL at one point, I think over the past summer, saying that more money needed to be raised to fight the media battle that they were seeing was being lost among the same constituents that you ended that, to your point about you ended last documentary with, young Jews, young people in general, were just not getting the Zionist messaging, and more needed to be spent on it. And Karp, by the way, you all point out.
Yeah, in relation to that, just the Israeli government realizes as well, and there is a whole office that's dedicated in the Israeli government to American colleges and American college campuses to try and control the debate.
Yeah. And when you mentioned Alex Karp, just as a reminder, he, if I remember correctly, you also point out that he is coming out of the Palantir, Peter Thiel world, right? Yeah. Isn't he? Yeah. So
he's the CEO of Palantir, which is one of the major defense contractors and AI developers, etc. And they're worried. I mean, that's how. That's how, and again, I want to come back to why this extreme reaction to totally peaceful encampments. Okay, there was no violence, there was nothing. There were simply peaceful encampments. There were free speech places. Why this incredible reaction to try and break those up and to ruin people's lives? To put them on blacklists so they would never get then they'll never get a job at a lawyer's again, or the reaction tells you how important they think it is. If it wasn't important, they would just let it go, right? If it wasn't important, they would say, well, this is a sideshow. We don't need to focus on this. But they realize this is the show, and that if they don't win this battle, they won't be able to win other battles as well. So that's what gives me hope. Okay, you said at the start that we had this optimism, we were looking at how it wasn't so one-dimensional anymore. How the discourse wasn't so one-dimensional, and that was going to become more diverse as we went on. I think that's exactly what we've seen. at the same time as the elites have doubled down on their support of Israel and used the power of the state, and when they send in the police, that is an indication that they've lost. Force is that's the force. That's the that's what's behind the velvet fist, right? Is the velvet glove is the iron fist, and that's what came down. And they wouldn't do that if it wasn't at the same time, something they felt they had to do, because if they didn't do it, it was going to be they wouldn't be able to do what Alex Karp said. We won't be able to deploy armies anymore.
So
I have this very weird, on the one hand, it's the most depressing situation I can actually imagine. At the same time, it's also the most optimistic in terms of how people have responded to it.
That's so, but where I get stuck in that, I guess, dialectic is that in response to that positive response comes even more attempts at manipulation, psychological warfare, public relations, propaganda, etc. And in your most recent film, I believe you're saying it's your most recent film, Atrocity Inc., how Israel sells the destruction of Gaza. It's a relatively short film, but what you all document in it is atrocious, I guess, pun intended here. I mean, the ability. The first is, as you all document, the recognition that this is necessary, as you've been discussing, and then the willingness. Well, I guess if you're willing to drop bombs on people like this, coming up with these narratives is I guess, the easier part, but or easier to come to in terms of a conclusion. But could you talk about what you talk about in this documentary, Atrocity Inc., and how has Israel been selling this war? And I guess we've been talking about already, but to what extent have they been successful? Not war. I'm sorry. This genocide. It's not a war. I don't mean if you use that word. Look, I got caught in my own. I got caught in the narrative myself, so I apologize. Yeah.
So partly it's we have to understand what happened on October the 7th. That's one thing. Again, very few people understand the actual events of October the 7th and what happened and what Hamas was trying to do. I mean, looking at it from the perspective, of Hamas, you'd have to say, despite all the incredible the damage and the murder and the genocide that's taken place, the destruction of Gaza. In last October, the Palestinians were on the verge of being forgotten. They're on the verge of what's called normalization, where a lot of Arab states were going to actually normalize relationships with Israel, including states like Saudi Arabia. And essentially, what Hamas said was, you cannot forget the Palestinians. And that was one of the reasons for the launching for the attack, is to remind people that you can't do all this on the backs of the Palestinians. We're not just going to go away and die. And to that extent, Palestine is now on the agenda. It is that normalization is not going to happen, and is now on the agenda. And what Hamas was trying to do was, they thought, again, they had no idea that they would be so successful. They actually thought that 90% of their soldiers would be killed in this assault, because they overestimated what Israel would do. And so when they broke through and essentially found no resistance to this, that they were able to kill, of the 1,200 people that are being killed, over 350 were Israeli soldiers. So you can't really include, Israeli soldiers who were involved in the siege of Gaza in this. And so the number of civilians, Israeli civilians were killed is around 650, and which is a far cry from the initial figure was 1,400, and even at the 650. It's really unclear how many of those were killed by Israel itself. from helicopter warships, and they were just killing anyone. And that was because of something that they deployed called the Hannibal Directive, which is for them, they would rather have their own civilians be dead rather than be captured by Hamas and be able to be used as political leverage. So again, October the 7th is really unclear what exactly happened. Hamas didn't even know that there was this music festival that was taking place. When they broke through the first line of defense and they were trying to get to the kibbutzim, that's where they were going to try and get the hostages to take back to Gaza. They were not involved. They were not interested in massacre. They were interested in getting hostages back to Gaza, live Israelis back to Gaza to use as political leverage. And because there was so little resistance to that, it then became a very chaotic day.
I'm wondering just quickly, sorry to just jump in, but I'm wondering what you think of the argument that since military service is compulsory for all Israeli citizens, this idea that there should be this level of distinguishing between Israeli citizens and army is a little bit of a blurred line, so to speak. Does that mean anything? And similarly, because I admit, because part of the reason why I'm raising that is because I tend to not think that the form of resistance is the issue as much as the reason for it. So, but when those distinctions are made, anyway. So I was just wondering about that. What you thought about that?
That's a good question, which is, what is the complicity of the civilian population in a military occupation, especially one that has universal draft, or almost a universal draft. There are over 374,000 reservists in Israel who are being called up on this. And so Israel is a militaristic society overall. It is. That's what it is. And so the distinguish between civilians and other people is almost pointless. Israel says this about Hamas or it says this about Gaza, that there's no distinction. When they're actually in Gaza, there is a real distinction. You're talking about over 2 million people. Mm-hmm. And Hamas is a very, very small component of that. But yeah, that's Hamas is a national resistance organization. Okay, they're not Islamic fundamentalists. They're not ISIS. They want national liberation. And October the 7th was for them, it was a very not limited, but what they wanted out of that was to say, we're not, don't forget us. Nothing is going to happen without the agreement of the Palestinians in how the situation is sorted out. And to do that, you won't negotiate with us in any other way. The only way you'll negotiate with us is if we have hostages, which is what they were trying to do. Now, what's interesting, I'll go back to the question you posed at the start, which is, given that there were, it was a very chaotic situation, and there were atrocities committed by Hamas. And I mean by that is war crimes. There were civilians who were killed. If we keep that distinction, there were civilians who were killed. And what's interesting is that for Israel, the atrocities that were committed and documented were not enough. They were not enough for what Israel wanted to do, which was, in fact, they saw this as the excuse. It wasn't an excuse. They were going to do it in one way or the other to finish what they started in 1948, which is an entire ethnic cleansing of the area between the river and the sea, and to get what a greater Israel, which is what they want. So they saw this as that opportunity, and therefore, and the atrocities that have been committed weren't bad enough. They weren't enough to be, and so they had to make them up. They literally had to invent atrocities that were so awful that no one would question what Israel was doing, at least until it was too late, at least until Gaza had been destroyed. And that's the thing with propaganda. It doesn't, even when it's proved false, it doesn't matter because it's done its job.
Right. Right.
And what Israel did was there were two phases to the atrocity. We call it atrocity propaganda, and the film we did was called Atrocity Inc. Because it wasn't just the normal way in which Hamas was being presented. It wasn't just rockets coming over. And the initial one was that Hamas is so barbarous that they beheaded babies. And that was the first report that came out, that there were 40 beheaded babies. They are monsters. Look what they are doing. And so what we did was we kind of traced through, where did this idea come from? And it came, when we look at it, it started on October the 10th. That is 3 days later after October 7th. And its source was one fanatical Zionist soldier who said he saw this. And from that one thing, it went everywhere. The papers, American papers, British papers, European papers picked it up, and people must probably remember that was everywhere, and starting from October the 10th, and then it was repeated by the Israeli government. They confirmed it, and then President Biden said, CNN actually, first of all, Sarah Seidner from CNN, confirmed it, like on air live, said, we have just heard, confirmed that there were that there were babies beheaded on in one of the kibbutzim. And then President Biden said he saw pictures of it, of this happening. And again, they walked it back a few days later, but by then it was too late. By then what Israel wanted to happen had happened, and people are still repeating it now. People to this very day still talk about beheaded babies, even though it is one of the most fraudulent things that you could, that was being invented. When it first happened, I was suspicious right from the start. I remember talking to a colleague of mine. I said, when they bring out the dead babies, you're in trouble. There's a genocide that's about to take place.
It gave the incubators in the what was
but the first
the first Gulf War, right? The bringing out the woman who was, this, I learned it from your documentaries. The woman who was connected to Rand.
But the first thing I thought of was Nair, who was the daughter of the Iraqi ambassador.
Right.
Oh, sorry, the Kuwaiti ambassador to the U.S.
That's right.
And she was coached to say that she saw Iraqi soldiers come in into Kuwait and throw babies out of incubators, and again a complete and utter falsehood, propagated by and coordinated by a number of PR companies, but it was enough to get the U.S. into that war. Because again, we have to go back. There was not American support for intervening in that war. Because it was just seen as those crazy Arabs going against each other, and to get Americans on board, you needed dead babies. And it goes all the way back to World War I. If you look at some of the posters in World War I, with Germans with babies at the bend of bayonets. It's a very old established trope. So whenever you see
George Creel, I'm sorry again, George Creel's line where he said the way he was successful in getting that World War I propaganda was, we conquered their convictions, meaning American citizens' convictions. I've always thought that line was so diabolical.
Well, that's the start of public relations.
Yeah.
That was the first really, the World War I Creel Commission was the first really successful propaganda campaign to convince a reluctant population to go to war. And nothing has changed since then. And so the dead babies one, the beheaded babies one, was just the latest. Israel then had to come up with, once the official Israeli figures, because there was an insurance commission. They had to figure out who's going to get paid and who actually got killed. Again, if people don't know, there was one baby killed on October the 7th. Her name was Mila Cohen, and she was accidentally shot through a closed door with her father. not deliberately, not you know, that was the one. There's only one baby that was killed. So any talk about babies being killed on, if you hear any talk about how many babies were killed on October the 7th, people need to know that there are facts on this in terms of how many people were actually killed and who they were.
And again, as opposed to Israel bombing not only entire civilian populations, but hospitals, targeting hospitals, and you know, so it's so the idea that if you're going to start counting, it's crazy to even say it, but if you're counting dead children, there's again no parallel.
There's at least 3 a day that were being killed in the last year by Israel. You know, some of them beheaded. I mean, some of the stories we hear from doctors, I mean, they've been destroyed. I mean, that they destroyed the hospitals, they destroyed the supplies. You know, doctors talking about how they were amputating limbs from children without anesthesia. That's the reality that people don't know. And every time you think about this thing, all you think about is, you know, beheaded babies and Hamas, you know, monsters. You've got to cut through that to get to the reality of it, and you can do it eventually, but it's too late. You know, by the time even Biden walked this back. Even the Israeli government walked it back and said, actually, no, there weren't any babies beheaded, you know, on October the 7th. It's too late. Half of Gaza is dead. You know, some doctors' organizations have said, you know, there's the dead are really undercounted in Gaza. That the dead are close to 118,000, and at this point, you know, about 10% of the population of Gaza is either being killed or injured in some way. I mean, genocide is not an extreme word to use. That is precisely what is going on. But it's, you know, you don't think about it because you're thinking about propaganda. You're thinking about ideology. And Israel needed to, that's what Israel needed. I mean, for me, it's interesting. Like the atrocities that were committed were not enough, because what Israel wanted to do was so extreme, they needed the atrocities to be so extreme. They needed the atrocities to be inhuman. They needed the atrocities to be what, you know, only what barbarians would do. And you then had to say, actually, this is not just Hamas. This is the entirety of the Palestinian people. And that's the second part where, you know, the defense minister of Israel, you know, Yoav Gallant, I mean, he said that explicitly. He said, we're dealing with human animals. And he wasn't talking about Hamas. He was talking about Palestinians in general. So we can't really think about the ideology and the propaganda without thinking about, you know, the decades, centuries long tropes of Islam and anti-Muslim tropes, of, you know, images that we see and stories that we see about that Muslims are inhumane. And so when that has been the history over the last, you know, 200 years. It doesn't take much then to, you only have to kind of hint at it to then paint an entire population in this way. It's the only way it's the only way that makes sense as to why, you know, why Americans who know what's going on, the vast majority, are just saying, oh, well, I guess that's, I don't know. I mean, they just kind of shrug their shoulders because it's not really happening to people. It's happening to barbarians. It's happening to people who are not like them. So we have to think about both the kind of the immediate propaganda and the very long-term anti-Muslim propaganda that has been there, you know, for a long time. So interesting is, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I
mean, what I found was interesting when I started looking at this was, you know, when the beheaded baby stuff, you know, died down. Okay, we can't keep going with this. Then they came up with all these other atrocities, and they had people, you know, I mean, just making things up. I mean, it's literally something. You see these videos, and you can see them actually making it up in their heads. What is the worst thing like? And so then, you know, and there's, I mean, there's individuals within this who were first on the scene, who are then able to kind of frame the initial thing. There's one. I mean, we focus on a couple of people. We focus on one person from this organization called Zaka, which is these religious fanatics who are being given permission to go into war zones to bury the dead. And they're not forensic experts. They have no forensic training. They have no, but they go in and they are able to tell the first story. And in fact, Yossi Landau, who is, was this first, he actually admitted it on camera. He said, look, we didn't see anything. We just used our imaginations. We just see these bodies and we use our imaginations to think about what happened. And we tell the stories that we think happen. And though the problem is those stories then become the way people understand it. And so, groups of children being collected, being rounded up and burnt and executed. Families being tortured, people's hands being cut off, etc. It was just, I said, when you see these people saying this, you can see in their heads that they're making it up. They're literally, because but there are reporters there, the stenographers of Western media. They're just taking notes, and that becomes fact. And especially then when it gets repeated by American politicians, it gets repeated by European politicians, gets repeated by the president, gets repeated on CNN, it gets repeated on, again, the American media is simply, they have no independence from the Israeli PR machine. They simply are literally parrot whatever the Israeli PR machine wants them to parrot. So again, I think people just have to realize whenever you see any story told by the mainstream media, by the corporate media about Israel-Palestine, think about it. This is actually what Israel is saying. This is what Israel wants you to hear. This is how Israel wants you to understand the situation. But after a while, they did the beheaded babies. They did these other atrocities. But then what they found was, come late November, that American public opinion was shifting, and in fact, the majority of Democrats wanted a ceasefire. Over 60% of Democrats wanted to ceasefire. For Israel, this is a real problem because what they want to do is carry on, and so they've got to think about get around the obstacle of Democrats who are starting to have second thoughts. And so what do? What do Democrats care about? What do liberal Democrats care about? Well, they care about gender, they care about rape, they care about sexual assault. And so that became the next round. They started to focus on this suddenly discovered plague of systemic sexual assault by Hamas. Gang rapes and people and women's bodies being mutilated, etc. Again, they put that out, and again, the media obediently pick it up. And it goes all the way to the New York Times. The New York Times does this major story. And in the film we just did, the Atrocity Inc. film, we break down the story. We say, this is the New York Times story. Here are the witnesses for it. Let's look at them, one by one. And there's nothing there. Everything falls apart. Everything falls apart. But again, it was enough. It was enough for them to carry on the genocide. It was enough for them not to have to even take a step back and to just carry on. And again, even though it's been proven false, I've no doubt in the film we say, look, atrocities were committed on October the 7th, okay, but they were isolated. Again, when Hamas went in, when they were, Hamas is a very disciplined, paramilitary group. And so they went in with a very clear aim. What they have to do is to get live hostages back to Gaza. That was their one and only concern, was to get hostages back to Gaza. But because they were so successful, and because the front line of the Israeli military collapsed, all these other people from Gaza started to flood through. All the criminals from Gaza, just ordinary people from Gaza, and who knows what happened there? I've no doubt that there were horrible things that were committed, horrible things that were done. Although again, Israel has tried to prove this. They've tried to, in fact, the national newspapers and the police put out a call saying we want any victims of sexual assault that took place on October 7th to come forward, and not one person came forward. Not one person. When the Israeli police were asked to confirm, for example, what the New York Times had reported, because there was one crazy. I mean, there was one witness who said, she was shot in the back and she was hiding, and when she was hiding, she saw 3 women get raped by Hamas fighters, and another 3 women beheaded by Hamas. And when the Israeli newspaper Haaretz asked the Israeli police, they said, "Can you confirm this? Obviously, there's got to be some forensic evidence on this." The Israeli police said, "There is no forensic evidence for us to show to be able to prove any of this." Again,
although I did see on Electronic Intifada a couple times where they interviewed and they showed Israeli news reports that don't seem to show up over here, where they're interviewing women who are saying we were treated relatively well. They were polite.
That's a disaster for Israeli PR. When the hostages were released, and the hostages said, and again, anyone who knows I've also heard interviews with people who are, who've been working on doing research on Hamas, and they said, look, this doesn't just sound like what Hamas never did this. Why would they, suddenly do this? In the midst of these highly trained, this highly trained operation, that they would take time out to, when being fired upon by the Israeli police and gunships, and they would take the time out to. You're asked to believe something that is so absurd that it doesn't even bear, thinking about, and yet that's exactly what. And people were willing to do that because these Arabs, God, they're so barbarous. These Arabs, they're just so animalistic, and they were able to do that enough so that Israel could carry on doing what it's doing, even though it's now being proved utterly false. Again, in the film, we say, that's how the atrocity propaganda works. It works. It only has to work it strikes you. It strikes you at the level of emotion. When you think about beheaded babies, and you think about, it's an emotional response. And even though rationally it is then disproved later on, the emotion still works. And so I don't know a way around it, because when you have the power to spread this falsity to start off with, which is what Israeli PR do, because they control American media so much, or media in general so much, then even when you can disprove it, it has no impact. So that's the really depressing part of this, is that you can have the most rational discussion of this possible, and it makes no difference. In the film, what we also said was that actually, when we used the discussion of the mass sexual assault, because remember, what they were talking about was not just isolated sexual assault, of which I am sure there was some, even though there have been no documented, cases of that. I'm sure there was something like that, because it's a very chaotic situation. In those situations, you put guns and men together with women. I mean, rape is going to be one of those. That's what happens in these situations. But what Israel was trying to show was that this was a tactic of Hamas, that the mass systemic rape was a tactic that Hamas used, because they needed to attack Hamas in particular. And again, even though it made no sense whatsoever.
But at one point, you all show an Israeli official or spokesperson on some news program explicitly saying that he wished sexual abuse and torture was part of Israel's policy when dealing with captured Palestinians.
Well, there's two things. In the film, we show that, Israeli officials, then actually kind of admit this. On one show, they're having a discussion where the commentator, you can't believe, he said, "Look, horrible things were done on October 7th. Why did you make why were these other things made up? Like, why did you have to?" That's what he said. And a politician, Mickey Rosenberg, an Israeli politician says, well, perhaps someone heard it as a rumor, and then he says, but remember, we're not just talking about military. This is also about ideology. This is also about, what people believe. And so the media has a big part. So it's essentially admitting, of course we lied, and that's part of what to get the people on board. That's what we needed. And again, in the film, we also have a clip from Netanyahu talking to these volunteers, these Zaka volunteers who first came up with these atrocities, and he essentially said to them, he said, "You've got to give us some time. Okay, we need to manipulate public opinion because to give us some maneuvering room for us to do the ethnic cleansing and the genocide of Gaza that we need." So then they don't particularly hide it. They talk about it openly among themselves. But then in the film, we use this as a pivot then to talk about Israeli society in general. And again, I think Americans have to get past this idea that Israel is some Western democracy and they're just like us. Israel is a deeply sick society now, in which the rape of prisoners is now regarded as legitimate. I mean, as you mentioned, there is a show taking place on Israeli television where they're actually discussing whether the abuse of detainees should be legitimate. That's the question. And in fact, over 60% of Israeli Jews think it's legitimate. Wow. And there's documented evidence to show that there was this abuse taking place in these camps. Tens of thousands of Palestinian men, especially, being rounded up and being put in these torture camps. The Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem, put out a report based on interviewing 55 Palestinian prisoners, and this is an Israeli organization. They said essentially the prison system has become a torture system, where the abuse of inmates is now routine and policy. And they even film it. There's even film of Israeli soldiers sodomizing Palestinian prisoners. And even when the soldiers were caught, even when the soldiers were charged, there was massive opposition within Israel that anything should happen to these people. They thought that they were heroes, and they should. So Israel itself is is not this democratic society that based on Western values. Right now, it is a deeply, deeply sick society that is primed for the genocide of Palestine, and not just the right wing, but ordinary civilians as well. And I think Americans have to get that idea, that they have to think about Israel in its reality. Not in the images that they think that, this idea that we share Western values, that may have been there perhaps 50 years ago. It certainly is not the case now.
Oh man. So the only other question that I have set for here is that around here we talk a lot about, I think very few of us on this platform are voting for Kamala. Many of us are voting for some third party, or many are not voting at all. I don't know about many, but some are not voting at all. Most seem to be voting for a third party candidate. But you all don't make any specific calls in this documentary, but you do have a clip of Kamala Harris parroting the same October 7th Hamas terrorist narrative. And yet she is being promoted as someone who is going to somehow be better than Trump just on this issue alone, never mind all the other comparisons. What do you think it means when the one who is being promoted as better than is fully consistent with that dominant narrative?
Well, I mean, that's around on this issue, there is no difference between the two parties. Okay, there is absolutely no difference. I mean, what would Trump have ddone that Biden did not do? What would Trump have done that Biden gave Israel everything it wanted. I mean, in one sense, it's a really pathetic sight. You know, this small nation in the Middle East essentially is holding the United States to ransom, and the United States can't control it at all. And which is why when I go back to the question at the start, which is how is it that this little country that's dominated by this religious cult, the Zionist cult, has been able to exert such power for such a long time over the entire Western political landscape? So, I mean, that we have to keep going back to that question. And in this case, in this instance, I don't think it makes any difference whether it is Harris or Trump. It will make no difference to the Palestinians in terms of what is happening, because American politicians are powerless. They are absolutely powerless to be able to do anything. The only thing they could do is stop the weapons, to stop the weapons being exported, and to stop voting again, and to stop vetoing resolutions in the UN that are critical of Israel. Okay, but if they do that, and again, at the political level, at the elite level, Israel has that locked down. There was a Republican congressman recently who actually said he wasn't one of them. He said, but you know, every one of my colleagues has an AIPAC guy. That was what he said. He said he has an AIPAC guy in his district, and anything is said about Israel has to go through. You know, people who don't know, AIPAC is the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee. It's the major lobbying arm of the Israeli government, and they write all the legislation and they control all the funding. I mean, we've just seen AIPAC make sure that a number of progressives, lost in the primary. People who have been critical of Israel, that's them exerting their power. So there's nothing that can until there's some major change in how politics is structured. Almost nothing can happen at that political level because it's all being locked down. So in answer to the question of Kamala Harris or Trump on this issue, I don't think there's going to be any. I mean, what could Trump have done that was different to what Biden has allowed to happen? And Biden and the Democrats, they're Democrats, and so they're able to bring along people who perhaps otherwise wouldn't go along with this. In fact, they're more ideally suited to be able to do what Israel needs to have done than Trump. Again, I think the advice I would give to people around this, because there's a lot of it. Who are you going to? Is it Democrats or Republicans? The advice I would give is from Howard Zinn when he was faced with this. And when he was asked, he said, look, this is, you should think about this for about 2 minutes when you go into the voting booth at that point. But the rest of the time, you don't need to think about it. You then build social movements outside of this. You do the real work outside of it, and you separate it out from electoral politics, which doesn't really matter that much. I'm saying this, I don't think Howard said this, which doesn't make a big difference. So think about it for 5 minutes, but the rest of the time, organize, do what you need to do to be able to have something different in the future, and not just every 4 years.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.